Welcome to another episode of The Shift with Elena God. In this episode, I chat with Kelly Mackin. She is the author of an upcoming book. It's called Work Life Well Lived. She's also the CEO of MotivesMet. So it's a well-being platform revolutionizing how we approach happiness and mental health in a workplace. Personally, I'm a fan of hers because she talks about all the things that I'm super passionate about. So human behavior, how do you what does it look like to live well? Should our jobs be all in, or is there some kind of prioritization or balance do we strike? What does that look like? So I just really am impressed with her background and just her ability to intersect psychology and behavioral science within corporate structures, right? And really just her voice for the need to emphasize systemic approaches to cultivate that organizational wellness, which again, as you guys know, I'm very passionate about. It's like there's a lot of trends about what companies are doing, but are they actually impactful? Are they actually effective when it comes to employee well-being? So she really kind of just opens up as well about her pivot to in her career direction and prioritizing her own well-being. And I mean, really, it's a lesson that we can all learn for sure when we're in such a demanding work culture. So being able to acknowledge that in yourself, make a pivot, and then also help others do the same, I think is phenomenal in the work that she's doing. So love her energy. I think you will too. Let me know what you think of the episode. Kelly, welcome to the Shift podcast.
Thanks so much for having me today.
I'm excited to talk all things well-being and mindset and talent and growth. But before we dive into it, you have a really interesting story. So tell my audience your career story. How did all of your adventures that you've had, and how did it lead you to doing what you're doing today?
Well, my career story really began back when I was just a kid because I saw my mom experience her work life and I saw such extremes in her experience. When I was very young, she really loved the work that she did. It gave her such confidence and purpose and joy. She was senior vice president of one of the largest global advertising agencies, and really one of the very few women SVPs. So it was a big job and it wasn't perfect, but most of her needs were well met. She was able to innovate. She was working with some of the best in the business. She had enough flexibility to make it work with 3 kids at home. But then when her company got bought out, everything changed.
Mm.
And I saw, instead of work amplifying her well being and happiness, that it just became the thing that was destroying her, to where she would get physically sick before work, to where she was
Mm.
pulling all-nighters all the time, working every weekend, no longer being able to innovate, being micromanaged. So it
Mm.
was really tough for me to see that and to really go, why? After someone's given 25 years of their life and constantly been bringing in business and clients, why are they being treated this way? But yet I think, like so many other people that I've spoken with, we've kind of grown up, most of us, Gen Z not as much, which is great, with this belief system around that's just kind of how it is. And you
Mhm.
have to toughen up and work's gonna kind of suck. And that's, one day, if you've given enough blood, sweat, and tears, if you really worked your butt off, then you'll get to a place where you can prioritize your well-being, your health and happiness. And that's very much the mindset I adopted. So I ended up on a very similar path as my mom. And I ended up in the most toxic work environment, where I can look back on some of the stories now and go, that was insane. How did I put up with that? I mean, people would be screaming in the office, slamming doors. It was
Mm.
Mad Men for modern times, whiskey at noon to deal with crazy clients, burnout I mean, it was really insane. It could have been a TV show.
Yeah.
And it took, for me, hitting some real lows, mentally, emotionally, physically. I know when you and I even just chatted before we jumped on, of just how physically well-being can really show up in our workplaces and in our work experience. And that's what I was seeing for me, just total physical destruction, developing an anxiety disorder, developing a sleep disorder. And I just finally went, you know what, this isn't how it's supposed to be. And that realization, that wake up call, as I like to call it, really propelled my life in a different direction. I moved from Chicago to California. I really reconnected with myself and I got deeper into human behavior research because that's what I really loved. I love knowing why we do what we do, why we don't do sometimes what we want to do. So did all sorts of research around mindset and stress and emotions. But then I wanted to understand things deeper. So I started to get into psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy and meditation and mindfulness. But then eventually it really led me to focus on well being at work and not just well being outside of work, because a lot of the clients I work with, wouldn't you know it, their biggest source of anxiety and stress and mental health struggles was around their role as a leader or their misery in their job or trying to navigate tough work relationships. And so that eventually brought me to start MotivesMet, which is a work well-being platform that really helps people to create their best work life and workplace.
I love that. First of all, like everything you said about like the behavioral science and all of that, like it's such an exciting field, and there's so much more research that's coming out of how we can apply all those learnings into the corporate world. And I wish more people would just understand the psychology and the behavioral aspect of us as humans and how complex it is, but how there are solutions. And you discuss some of those in your book, right? And we're going to get into that. But I'm curious, how many years did you spend in that in the crazy role, kind of in that environment till when you were like, and was there like a specific moment, or like what gave you the courage, I guess? Because a lot of my audience are people who are looking for some kind of change usually, and a lot of those are like, is it time to start my own business? Is it time to jump ship? So I'm always curious, like, what gave you the courage? When is it the right time? Is there such a thing?
It's such an important question. I would say I stayed too long for sure. I
Mm.
think it was about 4 years that I was kind of putting up with everything. And there is this one moment, and I share the story in the book, but there was this one day where I had left my house at like 5:30, 6 a.m. in the morning. And I woke up to our client, who we kind of nicknamed Hurricane Molly, just sending absurd, 24-hour demands. I'm running from one meeting to the next. I mean, literally holding my pee, like literally being like, I don't have time to even go to the bathroom. It was crazy. One of my friends quit and walked out the door. It was insane. And I finally leave the office around 11 p.m. and it's Chicago, brutal cold, that
Mm.
January wind.
To
And
add
I'm
to
like
it.
in my work heels and I'm like running to Union Station. And I get there and I see the last train pulling away.
No.
And it was just the longest cab ride back out to the suburbs, where I just felt emotionally drained, physically drained, just this different level of like, I can't do this anymore. This
Yeah.
cannot be my life anymore. And that was really the biggest catalyst, I'd say. I remember that day so vividly that then I really started to go, okay, how am I going to get myself out of this?
Mm.
And like you said, it can be really tough because some people are breadwinners in their family. Some people go, God, I went to school for this for 7 years or eight
Hmm.
years or 10 years. And now I'm saying I don't really want to do this job and I want to maybe go start my own business. I work with a lot of people like that. And it's actually one of what we call the 10 dream killers that threaten the dream of a work life well lived, which I talk about in my book, Work Life Well Lived. One of the
Mm.
dream killers is that we just don't end up prioritizing well being at work enough. That even if you said it's important to you, even if, when I was in misery, if someone had said, does your happiness matter at work? Does your mental health matter? I would have said, of course it does. But deep down, I didn't really believe that it could. I
Mm.
didn't believe I could prioritize that. And so, a big part of us being able to really have those work lives and careers and cultures that we want is really embracing that well-being matters and it's something that deserves the utmost time and attention.
Mm. Yeah, in organizations, and especially, after 2020 in organizations, there's been a lot of push for it, but I still, and I kind of see some organizations taking a more real approach to this, meaning that before it was like, okay, yoga mats and Fitbits, that's a well-being company. We care about you. But then I always say, like, there has to be, aside from the individual and the perks and all of that, there has to be a system and a process in place for people to not reach that level of this is ridiculous, to not reach that peak, right, to where you reached and so many other people reached. So it's interesting how it's transforming. And I still, a lot of companies, and I'm curious about your thoughts around some of the work that you do, but I still see a lot of companies, at the end of the day, I hear leaders say business is business, and that's just what it takes, and it is what it is. And I don't think that they understand the impact on productivity and a lot of other things of somebody who is engaged and feels, happy, content, whatever word you want to use at work, versus somebody who's not. And I don't think they understand the true dollar amount impact. They still revert back to like, well, we're still making money. Yeah, but you could be making a lot more, maybe. I don't know what you think about that.
One of the biggest downsides of ill being at work is that you will lose your best people. Plain and simple. That's just bottom line. One of the biggest negative effects of not prioritizing your employees' health and happiness. And at the end of the day, the cost of turnover is so high. The
Mm-hmm.
emotional cost, the camaraderie that is missing on your team, the connection. But then let's just talk about the dollar amount, the turnover to hire and train someone. And then even once you've hired and trained someone, they're not up to speed for a while. And then oftentimes you can lose clients. I literally saw that happen at that one company I was at. Clients were like, why have I had 4 new account managers in the last year? I'm not feeling good about you guys anymore. I'm walking out the door.
Mm-hmm.
So it is so much more expensive to lose high quality people than to keep them.
Mm.
And also, a terrible thing is you don't want people quiet quitting. Like you were saying with
Yeah.
engagement. Okay, I'm sticking around, but I'm doing bare minimum. I know as
Mm-hmm.
soon as I find something that's going to better meet my needs, I am walking out the door. And the reality is, I will say that worked more 15 years ago, 10 years ago, but it does not work now.
Mm-hmm.
Because people have a different mindset and belief system around what they desire and deserve at work. That
Mm-hmm.
wasn't as prevalent because people didn't feel like they could have that belief system. But now more people are. 67% of employees believe that well-being at work is a right, not a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
90% of C-suite were seriously considering leaving their job to go find a different one that better supports their well-being at work. And that's your top CEOs.
Mm.
So, yes, well-being matters from a pure ethical human standpoint, and that's really where we should be. But on top of that, it matters in the sense that it's just the smart thing to do. It's both the right thing to do and the smart thing to do.
Mm.
And our research shows when people are well at work, they are more likely to perform better at work and less likely to walk out the door.
Mm-hmm. This is one of the few times that I'm going to give credit to Gen Zs. My audience knows about my pet peeves around Gen Zs, but they are pushing a lot of it. Some of it pushing a little bit too far. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we still gotta work. We can't just all be kicking it all day. So, there's a boundary between, taking care of your well-being and not doing anything at work. But I'm an elderly millennial, so I'm still in that mindset of like, just like hustle and work and like just, it's just a job. But I think that leaders are just, I almost feel like organizations are adjusting, not because they want to, because they don't have a choice. Because otherwise they just, that like, I do a lot of interviews for my company, and I hire a lot of people. And when I start talking about the talent development and well-being initiatives that we have, that's when like the eyes light up, because that's what they want. They want to hear that if you're not a company that is providing that, a lot of these young, I'm in software development, like tech world, a lot of young techies, they're not interested, especially in tech. The burnout rate is so high, you
So
know?
yes, they are. I mean, good companies are getting it. They're hiring chief happiness officer, chief well-being officer, head of flexible work, head of growth, head of employee experience, because they want to be competitive and attract and captivate, be able to keep those really great people around.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Have you heard of the work of Robert Sapolsky?
I have not.
But it's okay if you haven't, but he's kind of like a best hidden secret in many ways when it comes to human. He does uh mammal mammal kind of biology. I'm totally messing up his title. I read him all the time. It's a shame that I don't remember. But anyway, so he does a lot of work around human behavior and where it comes from.
Mm.
And there's a really great talk around how complex, and in his work it's mammal neurobiology. That's what he does, I believe. And so in his work he goes back to say is like the reason why we do the things that we do is that it's not even about us today, it's about our ancestors and genetics, and there's so many things, right? And I think that there's like two sides to this. Like one's like, well, I am who I am, I can't change. And then two, it's like, well, also I have all these obstacles like my genetics, and that's what a lot of people use an excuse. But then there's got to be something in the middle, and that's what you talk a lot about in your book is like, well, there are strategies actually. There are things that you can control and small things that you can implement regardless of these obviously heavy things, you know. I'm just curious, like what are some strategies that you would recommend for an individual, right? Because change in organization starts with us first and foremost before it's spread.
Well, one of the things we really focus on at MotivesMet is we don't lead with go quit your job if you're not happy, because grass is not always greener, and you are always going to need to innovate and problem solve to get your motives met at work, as we call them, which are the human needs that really drive our ability to thrive at work today. So
Mm,
that may very well be the decision, as it was for me. But we don't lead with that in the sense of there is a lot you can do to be empowered over your needs. And they can be small things and they can be really big things. And it can be about getting support from other people. It can be figuring out who you need to set boundaries with. It can be determining where you need to elevate your mindset and belief system.
mm-hmm,
So, for example, for me, security is a top motive. We have what we call our human needs assessment that helps people uncover what are the top driving needs that I need met to live my best work life. Because what I need most at work is going to be different than what you need most. And through our research, we discovered there are 28 of these motives. So, for example, there's autonomy as a motive, flexibility, belonging, fun, growth. But when I first took our assessment, I uncovered that security was the top need for me. And even though I built the algorithm and did the research, I was kind of shocked because I knew what two of mine would be. I'm very freedom driven. So I knew flexibility and autonomy would be big drivers for me. But I did not know what my other three would be. And security, given I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an adventurous soul, just felt a little bit like a slap in the face. But the reason it was so important for me at that point in my work life was because I was going on this entrepreneurial path and starting this company and leaving the comforts of the career I had built behind. And that was
mm-hmm,
really scary. So I needed that innate human need to feel secure, to feel comfort was 100% what I needed. But
mm-hmm,
at the same time, I had to sit there and look at my top needs holistically because my other two top five needs were future success and achievement. If I
mm-hmm,
felt too secure and comfy, I probably was not doing what I needed to do to reach my big goals and ambitions.
mm-hmm,
So I had to go, okay, but fear and doubt is holding me back because this security motive is weak.
mm-hmm,
So, how am I going to empower myself knowing that I can't change the outside world? I can't snap my fingers and know for certain this company is going to work out and everything is going to be peachy keen. So, for me, it was a lot of mindset work of what risks am I going to take and why, and really putting pen to paper. And just doing that work helped me to really meet that need better and then elevate my comfort at work, my mental health, my well being. So,
mm-hmm,
for us, we say the strategy is you have to know what you need most at work. And then you have to go, how can I honor, protect, and strengthen those needs? And there's a lot that usually is in your power to make those better.
mm-hmm. Uh, it's interesting how you're right. We have a lot of that power, but I'm curious in your experience, how people have found it challenging to even have these conversations. That's what I noticed, right? It's like it's so hard. It's such a challenging conversation to have about us. It's like our hardest conversation to figure out what is it that we want, what do we stand for, our values, and so on. Which should be like, well, you should know yourself, and it seems, but we don't do it, like we don't have this time enough to like think about it because we're always so busy and going and going. What have you heard, like as you work with people, what are some of the challenges you see? And is it that people just don't have time to think about these things unless they go through certain programs? Is it the fears that are stopping them?
We are not good at reflecting on our lives. That is one big insight that's even shown in different research because it's so absolutely true that we are going, going, going. In today's world, especially with technology, more than ever, we are connected and we are constantly doing something. So we're not great about carving out that time to reflect naturally, whether it's on important things in our personal lives or our work lives. And so that's part of kind of what we help people do is create an avenue to say, okay, let's get to understand ourselves better and let's take the time to reflect on these things because most likely you're not doing that. I mean, one
Mm-hmm.
of the big, again, 10 of the 10 dream killers is that motives are a missing conversation, both with ourselves and other people.
Mm-hmm.
So, Aristotle says knowing thyself is the beginning of all wisdom, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
that easy to know ourselves. And we're constantly changing, we're
Mm-hmm.
growing. So, what I needed when I started MotivesMet a few years ago is different than my top motives today. Some have stayed consistent because they are very tied to my values and sense of self. But some of these needs has shifted as my life has shifted and as different milestones have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to live your life on purpose with purpose. We say you have to be really intentional with your well-being at work because we tend to take a passive and reactive approach instead of a preventative and proactive approach. But prevention is better than cure.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than waiting until you're bored to death at work or so burnt out or miserable or just getting to that really dark, low place like me and my mom were in, if you can be reflecting and in tune and paying attention to red flags and seeing when things are starting to go downhill,
Mm-hmm.
then you can really put yourself in a more powerful position to not get to those lows that become so much more difficult to get out of.
Mm. How much does environment impact or can enable or disable somebody from going to that reflection? Like environment meaning like the people you're around. Because I would imagine that's difficult as well. You can be somebody listening to this podcast, but then the people around you is just like the biggest blockers, but at the same time they can be your family members, right? And how much does it impact and what can one do in that situation? Like how do you get out of the, not let the environment suck you in?
Well, I think it can be really tough because when we're in certain environments, it becomes the norm. And
Mm-hmm.
we can get this tunnel vision. And that's certainly what happened to me in that toxic work environment. It was so normalized that this was just this craziness was how it was, especially when leadership kind of makes these cultural norms just how it is. So it's very difficult when you're in that position. And again, I think it just comes to you have to be proactive for yourself because you can just not expect that everybody around you is going to give you that well being you deserve or care about it in
Mm-hmm.
the way you care about yourself. So that advocating for yourself is a big part of meeting your needs at work. And that's what we say well being at work is co created. It happens when individuals and work peers and leaders and HR and kind of the cultural aspect of a company all show up in meaningful ways to keep these 28 needs healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's gonna be tough if you have autonomy as a top need and your boss is a micromanager. They're
Mm-hmm.
having a big impact on what's going on. That environment, that person, that relationship is going to be tough.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't lie to people and say it doesn't matter. It's hard because it's always not in your control. But that's one of the things we focus on, or I focus on in the book when we're developing what we call your work life well lived action plan is what parts are in my control the controllables, and then identify which parts aren't. And how can you see if people will give you support? If you better communicate, if you really will have courageous communication and tell somebody, hey, you're micromanaging me. Hey, I think I need to set some boundaries here. Because at the same time, we tend to think that people know what we need and they don't. And we're
Mm-hmm.
not always vocalizing and advocating for ourselves. And so you can't really expect people then to even show up in the ways that you need them to. So it's kind of like you got to focus on you first. Then you got to see what support you can get from others. And then you have to look at how healthy your top needs are and go, okay, if I've done that and it's still not working, it might be time for me to leave. Or it might be time for me to go on a different career path.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to again be willing to make those big decisions. You need to be willing to be uncomfortable to meet the needs in your work life that you need met to have well-being.
Mm. As for myself, I've gone through in my early 20s. I used to be the person who's like, I would always blame on the external factors. So I always say like I was a hot mess in my 20s. And I used to spend a lot of time on the external things I cannot control. And I think, you know, when I recognize like, oh no, like that's, I can do this and this and like not be in these situations and etc. Um, and I think it's just human nature for us. And I mean, I give kudos to people who are in 20s and just got their things together. I'm like, I don't know how you're doing because I was clueless. But, and sometimes I think for a lot of people, it's like we have to go through something in order for us to like be like, oh, like I can actually change some things. And it's a muscle that needs tuning. And I think that's what probably, at least in my work, I see a lot of people, afraid of that change more because it's a muscle, right? It's a muscle that hasn't been trained, right? And to be able to tune that muscle, but once you do, it's such a beautiful place to be. And then and the self-awareness, and it never stops. But I think that's, and that's what I like about your book, is because it's intentional. It's like being intentional and proactive, like you said, and preventive in terms of like, here's what you should be thinking about. And final thing, I want to mention before, before I let you comment, but what drives me crazy is that like it's so simple, but it's like all you have to do is like just give it a little bit of time. And yet it's like you have a blueprint, like here you go. And but it's just so difficult. It's so simple yet so difficult, so it's yeah, we're interesting species.
Yeah. No, we tend to make things more complicated than they need to be, right? I
Mhm.
mean, at the end of the day, even when leaders talk about a people first culture, like, well, what does that even really mean? That's become such this buzzword out there.
Yeah.
And again, we come back to our research shows people first equals needs first. If you want a people first culture, you put their human needs first and you make sure these 28 needs are healthy. And
Mhm.
like you said, it's really hard because I certainly wasn't trained on how to set boundaries, on how to have courageous, scary conversations, on how to have a confrontation with myself when
Mhm.
things aren't going well. And I think circling back to one of the things you said earlier of kind of what are those obstacles within ourselves? And sometimes we don't want to face how unhappy we are. We don't want to face that something isn't going well because we don't immediately know how to fix it. And
Mhm.
it becomes kind of, oh, I'm just going to ignore that. Maybe it'll just kind of work itself out. But usually that isn't what happens.
Mhm.
So it's much better for us to be able to tackle those things head on. And again, that's why we are so passionate about, we love research and human behavior, but we're very much about how do we take those insights and then make them actionable? What are the roadmaps? What are the action plans? What are the steps you can take so that you can really make a difference and feel empowered, not feel stuck, not feel at the whim of the world around you, which is a tough place to be in. Like you were saying in your 20s, I could resonate with that because I very much was in that same place you were.
Mm. I want to talk a little bit about the physical aspect because one of the things, because I want to hear about your adventure, first of all. I'm very excited to talk to you about your adventure, but um, the physical aspect of it, for me, my biggest fear is to get comfortable and not realize that I'm comfortable, in the sense of like not continuously challenging myself. And I mean, the days of me wanting to, go skydiving or do something crazy are behind me. Like I know I don't need to do that, but what I try to do is challenge myself physically. So like I sign up for races. I sign up for my first triathlon now, like a beginner one. I'm doing a Spartan race this year because all of that I feel contributes so much into how we operate in the workplace in terms of facing conflict, facing BS at work, drama, politics, all of that. And so talk to me a little bit about the impact. And, again, people can, you don't have to run a triathlon to challenge yourself. There's a million ways to do it. But talk to me about your experience and kind of your adventure and how that maybe helped you in your mindset and just resilience in general.
Well, I really learned that, taking care of myself and my well-being in my work life and personal life just had to be a must have, not a nice to have. And that physical component for me was so important for my anxiety, my stress, overcoming that sleep disorder that really developed from such a stressful work environment. So for me, I eventually found hiking and boxing, and those are two of my really big things. And now I also have competitive beach volleyball in there. But one
Nice.
of kind of the really big physical challenges I had is when I decided I was going to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro.
Mm-hmm.
in Africa. And I didn't, to be honest, quite know what I was signing up for when I did it because it's over 19,000 feet, one of the highest summits in the world. It was quite a challenge for myself. But at the time, it was exactly what I needed. And I built that mental fortitude and resilience in myself doing that, getting to the top of that mountain that has carried me through in so many different parts of my life. So, like you were saying, it doesn't have to be a Spartan race, it doesn't have to be climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, but finding what those outlets are for you. What are those physical pieces, those mental pieces that enable you to thrive both in and outside of work is so important. And I think it's a journey of self discovery
Mm-hmm.
because I get really frustrated when people try to put a one size fits all to anything, whether
Yeah,
it's
same.
work,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's what habits you should have, whether it's what your workout routine should be or your diet. I'm like, no, no, no. One size fits all does not work. Well being is personal. And that very much carries through to every part of the tools we do at MotivesMet. But what works as someone's morning routine will not work for someone else. Where I tried journaling. Guess what? Ain't for me. Doesn't really shift my mental or physical well-being for me personally, but I know people who love journaling and it is a huge part of their emotional release.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's having that curious mindset and trying different things on and then taking that time to reflect and go, okay, how did I feel about it? What did I gain from it? It does that come naturally to me? Why or why not? And just going through that discovery is really important.
Mm. I used to write for a big publication. I won't mention their names, and I remember the editor would always say, you should write an article that says 5 ways to this or 10. Like it always like two things. So and I know it's just a clickbait type thing, and I'm just like, so every time I see like I always tell everyone like, don't like, there's really no one way. Like we're all so different, and it's ridiculous to think. And unfortunately, there's a lot of that out there, and I think if people just understand like what worked for somebody else is not going to work for you, that alone can change a lot of people's lives. And if you just invest time to find out what does work for you, right, as much as you invest time in brunches and everything else that people do is maybe not great for your health, right? At least in DC area, it's a big thing, So it's just interesting again because it's so simple, and which is why I love having these conversations, because just like everybody else, I need my reminders, right? And it's always helpful to hear that.
Yeah, there is so much noise out there to navigate through. And it
Yeah.
was one of my biggest points of frustration when I started our MotivesMet platform, because we really began with the burning question of what even is well being at work? It's
Mm-hmm.
great we're talking about it, but we're not doing a great job at it because ill being is at an all time high. And this is even before the pandemic when we started our research. So, we started to do secondary research, talk to people, well being professionals, HR professionals, just employees in their everyday life. And it became really clear the world did not know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the obstacles in the way was that everybody and their mother wants to tell you these are the 5 things your team needs most.
Mm-hmm.
The TED Talk, this is your employees care most about appreciation at work or books, painting. Oh, work life balance. That's the answer. That is all you need. And your life, your work life is just going to be fantastic and perfect. And I found that these messages were so overwhelming and they
Mm-hmm.
were completely contradictory.
Mm-hmm.
One research study is like employees leave because of a bad boss. Another one says, no, it's because of lack of growth. A different one says, no, it's because things aren't fair.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, if you really want to amplify your happiness at work, if you want your team to be engaged and motivated and want to stay, what are you supposed to do with all of that?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really help us. It's not that some of that advice isn't helpful, but we need a way to simplify, prioritize, and organize it in a way that works.
Mm-hmm.
And so, even though it is simple, it's not as easy as what some people want to sell you out there. And that's why we say our approach is a no BS approach,
Mm-hmm.
because it is simple, but it isn't easy when there's 28 needs at work. And as a leader, you got to figure out each person on your team, what matters most to them, how they're different, what matters most to you. And even for yourself, your top 5 motives could hold friction with one another.
Mm.
Someone might have the future success motive as a top need and work-life harmony. And they might go, how am I going to make these two things work right now? They don't seem to really be, vibing with each other.
Hmm.
So we have to be able to get real with ourselves. And when we do that, and when we kind of accept what we call the ugly truth of well-being, then we're actually in a more empowered position. But we have to accept what the truth of it is first.
Yeah, no, you bring up excellent points, and it's I think it's one that myself and other people definitely need to hear, and it's we can't get away from it. If I always say like life is short, but it can also be very long, and you want to make sure you're living it in a beautiful way, at your kind of at your true potential, if you want to call it that. Before I ask you my last question, where can people get in touch with you? Where can they? What's the best platform for them to check out your work?
I'm very active on LinkedIn, and then my Instagram is Kelly Mackin underscore MotivesMet. You can check out our website, motivesmet.com. We have all sorts of research on there, resources, information about our assessment. And then my book, Work Life Well Lived, is going to be available, anywhere that you would like to purchase books.
Sounds good. And I'll make sure to share all of that in the show notes as well. Last question I ask all of my guests is, what is one question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
This has been a huge part of my routine that's worked well for me, given I have such a background in cognitive behavioral therapy and mind management work and meditation. One of my routines every day is I have note cards with questions to ask myself and thoughts I'm working on deepening in my belief system in my mind. And
Hmm.
one of the questions that I find so powerful that I wish other people ask themselves more, that I wish younger me had asked myself more, is what thoughts don't I need to carry with me today?
Hmm.
Because we have so many thoughts. And the problem isn't that we have these negative thoughts, it's that we make them mean something they're not. We have
Hmm.
60,000 thoughts a day. You're going to have all sorts of crappy thoughts. And our brain actually works against us. It skews negative because it's trying to protect us. That's what the brain is designed to do, not to make us happy, to
Hmm.
keep us alive. We still got the same brain our ancient ancestors did.
Yep.
So asking yourself, what thoughts could I let go of? I mean, how that you're like taking bricks off your back when you ask yourself that question and when you write down, yeah, I'm not going to give that attention today. I'm not going to let that hold power, over me today.
Hmm. Beautiful. I don't think I don't I'm close to 150 episodes, and I don't think I've ever had that question. So had a lot of questions. But thank you so much. Thank you for your time. I look forward to continue to read your research and follow your work.
Thank you. This was so great.